Andy Austin here with another Q&A on metaphors of movement. Now, I've recently asked for people to send in their questions. Some of the questions that have been sent in I'm not going to be answering simply because they are best dealt with in the training room. So I'm going to stick with the simple questions that are suitable for this particular format. So I'm going to go through in sequence here. I'll start with Dov's question. Now, Dov asks, you say that you differentiate and separate and don't mix your genres. Essentially, this is, I don't do metaphors of movement and IEMT and say NLP and other stuff in the same session. So Dov is asking, so how do I separate those things out? Why do I separate those things out? And basically, does it even matter? My main reason for keeping these things separate is I don't want to get confused myself. It doesn't take much. And I want to be able to work specifically with a client around a specific thing. Once we have a client working on a particular problem, by coming at it with this approach, which takes their consciousness in that direction, and then this approach, which takes them in that direction, we might end up confusing the client as well. However, I'm not saying for one moment, don't mix your streams. You can mix your genres, you can mix the streams. It all comes down to what is the purpose of mixing, what is it that you're trying to do. So a simple differentiation that I have, I shall take my glasses off because I can see the reflection. A differential I have. Integral eye movement therapy, I use that predominantly when life has messed up the person. Metaphors of movement I will use when the person is messing up their life. There's also other differentials as well. Some people are reporting very much memory-based, history-based stuff where the situation is the issue, it has consequences upon their life and their future. That's going to be an IEMT approach for me. Some people come at their problem very metaphorically, even if it is retrospectively based. And they'll give lots of metaphorical, idiomatic examples of that, in which case I'm going to work with the metaphors approach. Some people are going to come to me and they're going to say, well, I'm just divided in my thinking. You know, one part of me wants to do this and another part of me wants to do that. Well, then obviously I'm going to use a parts-based approach. Anything that basically results in an integration. There are eye movement processes for that. Eye movement integration is one of them. Or I could use something like Connie Ray Andreas's core transformation. I could use any of the NLP models that utilize parts work. And there's other models that have spun out of NLP type things as well. The intervention that I use is going to be matched to the structure of the problem. This is one of those things that so many coaches and therapists completely and utterly fail to understand. It drives me nuts. Here's the thing. You see it on the forums. They say, I've got a client coming to me next week with X, Y, and Z problem. And they tell you the diagnosis. They don't tell you anything about the problem. They just tell you the diagnosis, the label it's been given. What technique shall I use? And then people give their favorite techniques. Well, try off with this thing first and then do this one and then do this one. That's what I do with all my clients. How about understanding the structure of the problem of the client and then using the intervention that's designed to that particular structure? Let me give an example. Some clients will experience their problem as being energy blocks. So they have energy, they've got energy flowing through their body and it doesn't really flow very well. And they're feeling they've got inner energy blockages. Now, obviously, that's not the client that comes to me. But if they did, guess what I'm going to use? I'm going to use a model that is based around energy flow and blocks. There's all sorts I could use, or any of the tapping approaches. There's lots of these new agey approaches. I could make one up on the spot, havening. There's all these approaches that are built around energy flow and blockages of energy. Somebody comes with a parts issue, I'm going to use a parts approach. Somebody comes with a metaphorical issue, I feel held back, I can't move forwards, going to use a metaphors approach. I get flashbacks to bad events in my past, use a memory-based approach. It's not complicated. And yet, it seems that so many Facebook therapists, for want of a better term, don't understand that concept. Now, it's not unreasonable to do this. Some people come in with a mix of problems. They've had a horrendous background, life has happened to them and they've been messed up by it, and they make bad decisions and do really bad stuff in their current life to continue to mess it up. So there's a feedback and feed forward process. It would not be unreasonable to do IEMT work to clear up the past issues and then do a metaphors approach to deal with the current and future-based issues. Seems perfectly reasonable to me. I personally don't do that in the same session. I will do that in 2 completely different sessions. The reason being is that when I start asking IEMT-orientated questions, that is directing the client into very specific data. And you'll know, for those that have done IEMT training, you'll know I like people to be specific because it's built around the patterns of chronicity. By making them be specific and then giving us the data by which we can get them to concentrate on that particular thing and then move their eyes, that's really, really good. But we're not asking them to do that with the metaphors approach. With the metaphors approach, we don't need people to be specific. Hopefully, some of you will have recognized there's a relationship between the boundary violations of metaphors of movement and the patterns of chronicity of integral eye movement therapy. If you've never thought about that, or even considered about the connection between the two, that's something to think about. No, I'm not going to tell you what it is. If I'm doing a metaphors approach with people to begin with, I'm taking them into sort of a metaphorical landscape stuff, which is very generic out there. Metaphor is a different category of information to memory, which we'd be working with IEMT. So we're taking people into 2 different domains. The memory domain and the metaphorical domain are completely different to each other. The way they're structured, the way they are experienced, and the rules by which we engage with them as well. There's actually a set of rules to how these things work. They're different domains. If I'm going to mix between those in a session, I'm at risk of creating resistance accidentally, because I'm training the client into one particular process, and then suddenly I switch process to the other one, and then say, no, don't do that, do this. Not everyone has that behavioral flexibility. Some people have only one mode they can deal with at one particular time of their life. I like to keep things simple. I personally don't mix the streams. You're welcome to do whatever you like. If it goes wrong, don't come running to me. And I've got to say this, weirdly, when practitioners advertise that they do metaphors of movement, they do integral eye movement therapy, and then utilize my name, which is fair enough, I understand that, hey, it's good for me. When they screw up, those clients they screw up with tend to come to me to complain. So they're more likely to complain to me than they are to you for some reason. Make my life better, don't screw it up, and I prefer to not be dealing with those complaints as much as I can. Right, Mickey asks, can this be utilized? Can metaphors of movement be utilized in sales and management and so forth? Absolutely it can. Levels 4 and 5 of metaphors of movement is all about business and money metaphors. The business and money metaphors is not how to make money, how to do business. It's the application of the first 3 levels of metaphors of movement into the business and money applicational domain. So I'm not trying to teach what other people are teaching on business courses. This is the application of metaphors of movement into business and money. One of the areas, and it's not a particularly big area that we look at, is that of management. And one of the things of management is largely about the 7 relational positions that people can adopt. Those that have done the training, you'll remember from level 2, situational relational positioning. Where are you positioned relative to other within the metaphor? Are you behind it, in front of it, above it, below it, to one side, part of it, and so on? Because that relational position, of course, is hugely important in terms of the relationships that people have in their real life and the preferred reciprocity they require from other people. So in management, of course, this is quite significant because some people put their team first and they've always got their back. So they're in the background and they give them a good push forwards. Or they might hold them back, or they might hide in the background. Some managers take a forward position, so they're up front. They put themselves first and they expect the team to back them up. So these different relational positions are the stuff that we explore at level 2. You may then want to start to think about in actual workplaces, how does that then change how you recruit people? Because if your managers are taking particular positions, are they recruiting the right people? Or is it human resources, or is it even outsourced to another agency who are doing the recruitment? And they're placing people according to job specifications, not according to operating metaphors that individual managers or departments are using. And that is where lots of workplace issues and conflicts can arise. And also, by exploring those areas, we can actually then reduce some of those frictions and conflicts that happen. If I'm somebody who always puts my department first, and I'm the guy who prefers to be in the background, but I've got everyone's back, my workforce, that team, are unlikely to be paying me much attention. I want forward thinkers, upfront thinkers who take a frontline position when it comes to their work. Those people set the direction and pace and so forth. But if the recruitment agency or human resources are sending me arse kissers and followers, the people who prefer to have a manager take the lead in front of them rather than behind them, then we're going to have all sorts of difficulties start to emerge. So these are some of the considerations to have. These are the things that I cover also in level 4 and 5. That's the online program, businessmetaphors.com, levels 4 and 5, business and money metaphors. There's an online forum on that website as well. Every video, of course, has a comment section so people can ask questions, leave comments, add additional data, and so forth. businessmetaphors.com. Right, what else we got? So Marco asks about motivational structures in metaphor. Now, I don't actually teach this. This is one of those things that I'm going to do now. I might as well do this. I've just got to go and get some pens. Don't go away, I can't find the pens. Right, I found the pens, and while I was gone, I got myself a tea. By the way, in case anyone wonders, this is what we call a double bagger around these parts. It's a cup that's bigger than normal. It's too big to take a single bag. It's too weak. So it requires 2 bags, a decaf and a full strength, a double bagger. Right, these pens have been in this cupboard for years. In fact, when I say years, probably about 5 years. Let's see if they actually work. Right, let me give you some motivational structures. We have a... For fuck's sake. Right. Have a pen that works. Right, we have a person. Stereotypical position. And the person, we're going to give them a path. At this point in time, it does not matter what that path is. But a path, you will remember from the training, is a set of guidelines. Essentially, the path is a suggested path. It's a set of guidelines. You don't have to stick to the path. Well, unless, of course, the terrain either side of the path is untenable. The path itself might be the least tenable thing within the terrain. Like we find people, their path is full of glass, or it's treacle, it's glue, it might be even a river, and the rest of the world is perfectly reasonable landscape, whether it's tarmac or countryside, and it's firm footing. And so the path itself is the impossible path. The landscape is actually preferable. And yet for some reason the person sticks with the path. Now we have to look at what's that person's motivation. And often the motivation is the destination that the person is moving towards. Now, this is where we come into Charles Faulkner's distinction. And this was based on a conversation I had with him years back in the interval of one of the trainings, where he was talking about marketing having shifted from going to get business. We used to talk about go-getters, people who would go and get business. And then we shifted really to the dynamic of attraction marketing. The law of attraction became a big thing. Around about the same time, we had all of the speed seduction stuff that shifted. So you had Ross Jeffries' work, which was very much about going to get the girl. And then you had law of attraction era, which was how to make yourself more attractive and get them to come to you. And then we had all sorts of weird and wonderful things emerge within the seduction communities and so forth. Thank God that's mostly ended now. Although that said, I did a workshop recently over in Romania, and while we were doing the metaphor stuff, or IEMT, in the other room, big class, there was the seduction group. What a bunch of them. Anyway, save that for another day. When we have a path, generally the motivation is that of the goal, the destination where the person is going. You will have noticed, if you've done enough elicitations with people, you'll have metaphors where there are paths or roads of some description, and there are those metaphors that have no path of any description at all. Have a look within there. What is the motivation the person has? What are the towards, what are the away from values that are expressed within the metaphor? Those towards and away from values are going to give you modal operators. Let me just diverge for a moment to the modal operators. So if I give a person a classic container metaphor, and that is, we're going to make that the prison cell from which there is no escape. What are the modal operators this person is likely to use? They're going to be modal operators that are prohibitive and absolute. I cannot, I won't, I can't, because they can't do stuff. This person here, their modal operators, they could go left, they could go right. They would go with what's left and they would go right if. Because could is about existing probability, would is it's still possible, but there's an additional component that must be fulfillable. Difference between woulds and coulds. There's somewhere on one of my websites I wrote a thing, this is from years ago, about the rule structure of modal operators. Now, they might go forwards, they could go back. So you'll start to hear the variables that exist. This is the person who at this moment won't give you a can't. However, let's complicate their life, and now we give them something that holds them back. Now, they could go back, they could explore what's left a little bit, and they might go with what's right, but they can't move forwards. So again, the modal operators get revealed through the metaphor. What you're able to do, if you are able to listen to modal operators at the point of elicitation, you might hear these things being expressed. So the person might tell you they're on a path in a perfectly reasonable landscape which would facilitate direction, any direction they could go in. They've only given you path and reasonable landscape. They've not given you additional factors, but they say to you, they're presenting problem, I can't move forwards. We know there's something missing in the metaphor that they're not yet telling us, possibly because it's not yet at conscious threshold. They haven't got the insight into it. So that's how I'm able to say, okay, there's something missing in this metaphor. I've noticed I don't always consciously pick up the modal operator at the time, but when I get that scenario, I might feel, hang on, this doesn't match with what they were telling me before. So I say to them, I feel like there's something missing from the metaphor. Pay closer attention. If they don't get it, I can say, take a step forwards and tell me what you notice. They go, I can't step forwards. Aha! What happens? Something holds me back. Okay, how does that change things? I can't move forwards. Now we can find out what holds them back. So the modal operators within rule structures give you additional components that the person may not be conscious of yet. Back to motivations. Now let's give this person, let's change the picture. Now what we're going to do is give this person a motivation. So they're on a path, except there's something here that's dark. There's a darkness in the background. Their motivation to move forward is to move away from the darkness or to escape it. And as they move forwards, guess what happens? The darkness follows them. So where are they going? They don't know. What are they doing? They're moving away from the darkness. This is, again, towards away from values. And as long as they're moving away from darkness, they're doing fine. How do they know this is the correct path to be on to escape the darkness? They probably don't. It's just that there's a path there, and paths are suggested direction, so hell, we'll just go on the path. How's it working out for you so far? Probably not very well. That's why you're in therapy, right? So the motivation might be to move away from this. This could be another person. This could be an object that's moving, it's malevolent. This could be the classic thing of somebody with a spear. It could be something that's explosive or dangerous or somehow presenting a threat. So we have an away from value. Now, they might also, of course, have a wonderful towards value up the end of this path. So when I get to the end of this path, that's when I've made it in life and everything is good. Good to get away from that. Good to move towards that. We have motivation. However, this follows them anyway. So guess what? Even when they get to their goal, they're still going to be as miserable and worried about the past and in the background as they've ever been. This won't necessarily make them happy because it didn't help them escape from this. But it kept them busy for a while, so that's quite important for them. Let's look at other motivation values. So the other thing, let's just see if you can see this. Yep, that fits on the screen. Let's give it this following scenario, where here, the person is in a landscape where this is an edge, and that is a drop down to an abyss. So now they want to move away from the edge. And so to move forwards is a move towards greater security. So that might be the motivation there. It's an away from as well as a towards that's built in, but as proxy. However, it could also be that this is unstable ground and it's crumbling. The ground is crumbling beneath their feet. They're losing support. So they're moving forwards there. But I've recognized not everyone does. It's weird, you know, when people start losing support and things start going bad, that's often not a motivation for the person to move. That's not a motivation for them to go places. In fact, they don't go anywhere. They just stand there, hoping and waiting for things to change. Now what we have is internal, external reference. If I just switch to a personal example, last Monday, I closed my Etsy shop. And one of the things I did was having closed the shop, I then took 3 or 4 carloads, I think it was, of stuff to the tip. I first of all checked around the charity shops. Nobody wanted it, so I dumped the lot. The reason I closed the Etsy shop was because Etsy's terms and conditions for myself are no longer tenable, so enough of that. So I bailed there and then. Now, I'm watching on the forums other people suffering the same problems that I was having with the online retail market, particularly through Etsy. And it's amazing to me watching how many people are now struggling and suffering and are slowly going bankrupt, because for some people, this is how they make their living. They know the end is coming, but they're not doing anything about it. They're trying to make the bet. They're doing this. It's crumbling away around them. So what I've done is I've cleared the attic and I have put up the lighting stuff, and I'm now doing videos. I have basically redesigned this space to be able to do now what it is I want to do. That's not involving Etsy. I saw this with Blockbuster. Blockbuster, when online video started to come, they'd made the transition from VHS to DVDs, but they couldn't make the transition from DVD to online, and they hung on and hung on and hung on, and then the stores basically had no custom, and then they went bust. They should have quit while they were ahead. They're losing their customer support. Time to quit. You can see where it's going, but people don't, because they hope that something's going to change. Now, I'm very internally referenced, which is lucky compared to considering what people say about me online. I'm very internally referenced, so external stuff doesn't bother me. I don't require external validation as much as some people. Some people are very externally referenced, so they require external validation and support and input. So when they suffer a problem, they're looking externally for change. When I suffer a problem, I look internally for change. And they both have benefits, they both have negatives. So no one is superior to the other. I'm guessing a flexibility to be able to shift is better. So if I'm in that position, I'm not going to be waiting around to see what happens next. I'm going to go, okay, this place in which I find myself is no longer supportive of me. I'm going to be somewhere else as soon as I can, and I'm going to be off. I'm going to be moving. I'm not going to be one of these people who hang on and hang on and hang on as everything crumbles around away from them. So we now have the guideline the person has or has not got, an external motivator, a support level that supports the choices they would make, whether they're active or passive or reactive, and whether they are internally referenced or externally referenced. These are the things I'm looking at as I'm looking at the individual and looking at the metaphor. Because now I need to know if they're externally referenced, brilliant. What's their threshold? Will one person do it? Okay, that's great. I can just tell them what to do. Or do they need 2 people as a convincer? In which case, I'm going to quote other people and agree with those other people I'm quoting. Most of those quotes are invented on the spot. Are they one of those people who need 3 people? So I might quote, give my own version of what I've just quoted, and ask the person, do they know anyone else who would think like this as well that they might need to talk to? Or are they a person who needs endless reassurance and hand-holding? Because the threshold tends to be 1, 2, 3, or everybody. Some people are never suitably reassured if they're externally referenced because their threshold is way over 3. These are the things I'm looking for. And in which case I'll go, okay, so you need lots of reassurance here, and this is crumbling around you, and still you're not taking action. How many people do you know in the same position? How many people are going to suffer this along with you as well? So I now put their experience out there into other people's stuff too. Let's see what comes back from that. So it's not just a case of I'm looking at the metaphor and then doing the basic stuff. I'm also considering all the meta programs from NLP. Shelley Rose Charvet wrote a fantastic book, and this was one of my studies for a long time, looking at the motivational strategies and meta programs. Words That Change Minds by Shelley Rose Charvet. Buy that book, study that book, then do what myself and 2 of my friends did back in the day in Southampton. This was back in our NLP group days. We would go into places where there were other people, either a pub or a restaurant or anywhere where there's congregations of people. We would watch their behaviors, and we would have a list. And on the list was all of the meta programs and tick boxes. We would pick a target. So somebody who didn't know we were there watching them. And then the 3 of us, we would tick the lists to find out what we thought their meta programs were, and then we'd compare. What was interesting to us was how quickly we started to converge, and we would be seeing the behaviors that we were then able to test it within the NLP group, within the hypnosis NLP group at Southampton General Hospital. So that was a really good way of learning this stuff and actually then calibrating it against real world behaviors. Other motivation strategies that people have, or other motivationers within the metaphor. What we're going to be looking at are, where are they going? Where have they come from? What are the threats that is in their future? Basically, everything on the map is either a threat or a resource. There's all the stuff that's inert, I guess, at some position. Although if it's a ground that's inert, that's support. So let's look at threats and resources. Within the metaphorical experience, there's a threshold that basically they're moving from what is known to what is unknown. And that threshold is that of knowing. Now, that threshold is going to be different for different people. For some people, it's within an immediate vicinity. You'll know this because when you elicit the metaphor, they only tell you what's in the immediate vicinity. So what's to the left? They tell you what's immediately here. What's in front? They tell you what's here. They don't know what's beyond that because the unknown to known threshold is very close. For other people, it's a lot further out, so they know what's there. You'll hear them say things like, well, what's to the left? Well, there's the road. Now, I don't know if I'm making this up or not, because it seems to be like there's a field and some trees, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just making that up. All right, that's where the threshold is. Where the road ends, or the road to the left is, there's a threshold there that goes from known to unknown. And now they're guessing. But they might not have that in other directions. So they might well know what's over there to the right. They don't know what's out there in front of them, and they know only too well what's behind them. People don't tend to have this willingness to move into the unknown. The greatest motivator being that of seeking out the familiar rather than seeking out the unfamiliar. Unless you're one of the weirdos like me, and I like to find the unfamiliar. I like to explore the unfamiliar. But most people don't think like that or feel like that. So now the motivator might well be to stick with the familiar and the known rather than the risk of the unknown. And that will give you potentially the directions they're going to be most comfortable with going, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the best directions the person can go in. Sometimes the unknown is the very thing you've got to go and do. I'm not one of those life coaches that says you must come out of the comfort zone and explore the unknown. Fuck you! Who do you think you are? I spent the last 49 years building my comfort zone. Thank you very much. But some people have that. However, we've got to be realistic. I know that when I was working for the large automotive manufacturer, really, really good pay, a pointless job where I literally had nothing to do on most days. Great. I was stuck in a rut. and I was very well paid. I had very little workplace stress because there was very little to do. It was great. But my life was going down and down and down and down as I got demotivated. I became increasingly isolated. I didn't know what I was doing with myself and so forth. Things went wrong when we had a change of management, and Andy did not get on with the manager. And it got messy, shall we say. And I left. I then left that work. Voluntarily, I think, would be reasonable, but not without some kind of pressure. Now, as a result of leaving, I then basically lost a very, very well-paid job. And my job options were quite limited because it was going to be very hard for me to get equal employment again because those jobs aren't very common. And I did not want to go back to working into hospitals. So I now entered a period of time of my life of the great unknown, not knowing what to do, and really facing losing my house and all the other things as well. Not a good time, didn't enjoy it. It was the most useful thing that ever happened to me because it shocked me out of the rut that I was in, and I had to, after a period of despair and drinking, I then had to do something about it. Sometimes the comfortable rut that is killing us slowly enough we don't notice it to be happening. So the thresholds are quite important as well, from known to unknown, and the distances involved there. They will give you data too. Do they have something to move towards? Is there an outcome that's useful? What are they moving away from? What are the active factors? Because here's the other thing. We have active and passive elements within the metaphor. Some things are inert. Some things exert a force upon us. Some things receive a force from us. And that also can influence people's motivations. This is some of the stuff we look at in the masterclasses on the metaphors work. Right, next one is, what about children? Yeah, what about children? Try and avoid them as much as you can. It's usually for the best. Now, what my experience of children is that at a certain age, normally pre-puberty, kids don't hear metaphors as being metaphors. They take them literally. So if we talk metaphorically, they hear that as literal instruction. So there's a difference between figurative speech, metaphorical speech, and literal speech. Young children tend to hear everything literally, even if you're being figurative, even if you're being metaphorical. So that's worth knowing. It also means that kids love this metaphors work. I tend not to work with children because it's very rarely do I get referred a child who I think needs therapy. Most of the time I think the family needs work, or the parents themselves need work. And so I tend to orientate myself there. However, I do sometimes see children. I insist that if they're under the age of 15, they are choosing to come and see me. They have to contact me to book the appointment. They have to fill the form in themselves. If they don't do that, I don't see them. And so these are usually the super bright kids who are seeking out additional input. And they see me more as a teacher than as a therapist. So some things that just spring to mind, a couple I've seen in the last, say, year or two, I don't see many children. They were young teenagers who had ARFID, so they had eating disorders. They had highly selective, highly restricted food intake disorder, and they wanted to do something about that. And so working metaphorically with them was actually very, very easy, and we got very good results there. There was one of those children who was super, super bright. I think she was about 8. And she was the one, according to mother, and I believed her, had actually found me or heard of me, probably through somebody else, and had asked to come and see me about stuff. And she just basically wanted to be cleverer than she was. And she was one of those weird kids who was super, super bright. So those are the kind of problems I deal with. When it's the case of my child has behavioural issues, yeah, right, I'm not surprised. You two need to come and see me, or you, the parents, needs to come and see me. Let's start there to begin with, and let's see what we can do. I don't have any children of myself. I'm not really someone who spends a lot of time around children, so I'm an absolute expert on how to be a parent. There's nothing I don't know, because it's never been ruined by reality. Can you give some insight into how you transition the work in the first session to the work in a follow-up session? Do you check in with the client to elicit stuff in between? Blah, blah, blah. Right. essentially it's this. I tend to take every single session as the first session I've ever done with a person. I very rarely will remember the client in between sessions. I can't pretend. I have the assessment form in front of me, and it might look familiar, but because a lot of what I'm doing is on the fly, it's made up in the moment, it's all spontaneously done, I tend not to have much memory of that stuff, because that's not the stuff that I encode as memory. Similarly, because of the homework I set people, and they've done metaphor stuff, and they may well have emailed me with their metaphors in between, and I'm not going into much content with people, there's not a lot for me to make an inquiry about. I see my job very much as to explore this stuff, to teach the client how to make these changes themselves and to do these things without me, and then to get them going solo with this work. How do I do the second session compared to the first session? I don't do anything any different whatsoever. And when they say, so you'll probably remember in the last session, I go, I don't think I do. I probably don't. So just tell me anyway. Just imagine I don't remember, and then let's start there. So I don't try and build in a sequence of stuff. However, there are exceptions to this. So some of the people I work with, they have serious mental health problems, or we're looking at longitudinal work for them. So they will need work over a number of years. Now, when I'm doing long-term work with people, I tend not to see them very often. I see them maybe once a year, once every 3 or 4 months. It's enough to get people going and get them started on life changes themselves. They may well be doing other work with other counselors or therapists. They may well be seeing a psychiatrist for medication as well. So I'm not doing total care. I'm doing this with them. Now, in that case, what I'm going to be doing is, in the elicitation of my early metaphors with the person, I'm paying very, very close attention to the sequencing of the work I will need to do with that person. For example, the example I use in the training is the guy in the pit of despair who's been there his entire life. We get him out of the pit of despair. What are the emotional states he's going to be experiencing when he's released from that? And how is he going to cope out there in the world when he's spent his whole life in the pit of despair? So I can start to sequence the work that I'm going to be doing and plan when I bring them back for a follow-up. So there's a lot to this, and this comes down to a lot of the stuff in the time predication and time work that's taught at level 6. This is not really straightforward introduction level stuff. Because one of the things we can see, there's a relationship between distance and time, and you can pay attention to the speed of processing the client presents to you. You see, some people are really quick thinkers, and they just have ideas, and they're all over the place. And then you get the guy who... I'm sorry, what was the question? You get those people, and most people are somewhere in between those two things. I'm paying attention to how they're transiting and traveling in the metaphor. This guy is walking on the path. What if he was in a racing car versus a bicycle versus sitting on the back of a large tortoise? This gives you an idea of the rate of change that is familiar to the individual. And if we get them off that particular rate of change into a different one, do they revert? Or do they adopt the new one? And so these are some of the considerations I have, but this is level 6 stuff. So I don't want to go into too much of that at this moment in time. Right, just checking the time. Right, let's do one more. Okay, now we have one from Alan, which is basically, I often say, I see what you're saying. The thing is, I'm not a very visual person. I'm mostly kinesthetic. Yeah, aren't we all? So is this just a phrase I have learned and is not the metaphor work, or is it an insight into my thinking? No, I don't think it's an insight into anything at all, to be honest. I'm not even sure it gives these sort of expressions and phrases. I think they're more a cultural reflection than they are a psycho-neurological reflection of processing. With the metaphor stuff, I try and eliminate as much as possible all of my auditory, visual, and kinesthetic language. Now, sure, I'm drawing the metaphor, but the metaphor experience is proprioceptive. So it's in a different system. It's not something that you can see the road and all the rest of it. It's as if there's a road. So in the elicitation, I don't say, and what do you see to your left? I just go, what's to the left? What do you see in front? No. What's in front? So eliminate the VAK from the language. I'm not convinced that the the modalities within the NLP stuff, where we're taught that if people use visual language, that means they're a visual person. I'm not convinced by that. I think there are clues and indicators, but I think there are multiple other factors that could be deciding the choice of the language that they use. And so these could be a cultural reflection, a habitual reflection, as opposed to a direct relationship to their psychoneurological processing. The trick is really paying attention to rapport stuff. So when I was a student nurse, and we did various modules of training, 90% of which was absolute nonsense, but there were certain modules they taught us that I thought, okay, that's really useful to know. Basically, the module on what not to say to patients, this was all based around some quite senior clinicians' experiences themselves of stuff. And so it was things like, don't say, I know how you're feeling, I know how that feels. Don't do that. It's much better to say things like, you'll just feel a small prick. Or as they all say these days, sharp scratch. They've been replaced by other stupid things that people say. These things that are attempts at rapport building, so I understand your experience, basically don't bother. Don't bother saying, I know what you mean, I see what you're saying, I feel, I understand, I get it. Don't do that. Just don't do that at all. In the metaphors model, levels 1, I say to people, just forget it. We're not building rapport here, we're building a disrapport. Don't claim to understand another person's experience. Demonstrate it. So don't say, I see what you mean. No, draw the thing, idiomatically feedback their experience to them like you are talking their experience. Speak their language directly. So the person who says, I see what you're saying, is basically making a claim. And if you can't back that claim up directly through your demonstration, if you're not demonstrating that you see what they're saying, oh boy, you're going to be in trouble. And there will be a problem in the rapport between you and the client. So here, my best advice is don't make claims for understanding another person's experience in whatever way you represent that. And there'll be lots of ways you can say it. Just don't do it. Demonstrate it instead. And so this is my observation of working metaphorically with people. I don't ever make claims to understand people's experience, yet people experience me as some kind of mind reader because I just seem to intuitively know. I don't. I just know how to elicit a metaphor and feed it back through colloquial idioms of the culture. And I don't have to make any claims about that. So I think that's all I'm going to do for this particular video. If people have additional questions around the metaphors of movement stuff, do please stick them in the comment section below. Click that like button. You have no idea how much that actually helps, because the YouTube algorithms boost me up the ratings and all the rest of it. I'm trying to be more famous than I currently am not. Click the like button, you know what I mean.